The impact of COVID and the war in Ukraine have created significant long-term challenges for the United Kingdom. That is why my government's priority is to make the difficult but necessary long-term decisions to change this country for the better.
You won't believe what just rocked the royal family. Shocking claims say explosive DNA evidence has surfaced, triggering a move no one thought possible, King Charles allegedly kicking Camilla out of the palace. But that's not even the worst part. Rumours involving Louis and Charlotte have sent the internet into meltdown and left the monarchy scrambling. Is this the biggest royal betrayal ever, or a scandal being buried in real time?
Are lucky enough to spend precious time each year in Aberdeenshire. And finally, because 10 years ago, I received the great honour of being installed as Chancellor of this very special university.
According to sources close to the palace, tensions reached a breaking point when King Charles discovered what he considered to be an unacceptable breach of trust. The morning reportedly started like any other at the royal residence. Charles woke early, as was his habit, and made his way to the breakfast room where he and Camilla typically shared their morning meal. However, on this particular day, something felt different. The Queen Consort was absent, and no explanation had been given to the staff or to Charles himself. Those familiar with the royal maltide couple's routine noted that Camilla's absence was unusual. She was known for her punctuality and rarely missed their morning appointments without prior notice. As Charles sat alone at the breakfast table, staff members reported an air of unease settling over the room. The king appeared distracted, his mind clearly elsewhere as he went through the motions of his morning routine. It was during this time that a senior aide approached Charles with a sealed envelope. The envelope bore official markings, indicating it came from the palace's legal office. According to witnesses, the aide's demeanour was notably formal, even by palace standards, suggesting that whatever the envelope contained was of significant importance. Charles accepted the document and dismissed the aide before opening it in private. What Charles found inside that envelope would reportedly change the course of his relationship with his wife. The document was identified as a draft amendment to his last will and testament. 4. Any person changes to such an important legal document would warrant careful attention. But for a monarch, the implications extend far beyond personal matters. The will of a king affects not just family members, but can have consequences for the institution of the monarchy itself. As Charles read through the document, he came across something that immediately caught his attention. The amendment proposed removing Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis, the two younger children of Prince William and Catherine, as direct beneficiaries of his estate. According to palace insiders, this was not something Charles had requested or authorized. The two children, currently third and fourth in line to the throne, had been deliberately excluded from provisions Charles had previously ensured were in place for them. What made the situation even more troubling for Charles was what he found at the bottom of the document. There was a note to the royal lawyers, brief but clear in its instruction to proceed with the proposed changes. The handwriting on this note was reportedly recognizable to Charles immediately. It belonged to Camilla. The realization that his wife had taken steps to alter his will, without his knowledge or consent, struck him deeply, sources suggest. This discovery prompted Charles to reflect on recent conversations he had shared with Camilla. Over the preceding months, she had made several comments about the family's financial arrangements and inheritance structure. At the time, these remarks had seemed relatively innocuous, perhaps just idle thoughts about estate management or concerns about the complexity of royal finances. One conversation that reportedly came back to Charles involved a discussion about streamlining the distribution of royal assets. Camilla had suggested, according to those who were briefed on the exchange, that concentrating resources might be more effective than spreading them across multiple heirs. Charles had apparently taken this as a general comment about fiscal responsibility rather than a specific proposal regarding his grandchildren. In another instance, Camilla had mentioned that William's children would naturally inherit substantial wealth and positions through their father's line. She had posed the question of whether it was necessary for them to receive equal shares from Charles's personal estate as well. Again, Charles had not interpreted this as a serious proposal, but rather as a topic for future consideration. Looking back on these exchanges with the knowledge of what Camilla had done, Charles reportedly began to see them in a different light. What he had dismissed as casual conversation now appeared to be groundwork for actions she was already planning to take. The feeling of being misled, of having his trust used against him, was said to be particularly painful for Charles. Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis hold a special place in their grandfather's heart, according to numerous reports from royal observers and family friends. Charlotte, known for her composed demeanor and natural curiosity, and Louis, recognized for his energetic personality and charm, have been described as bringing joy to Charles during family gatherings. The king has been photographed with his grandchildren on multiple occasions, and those close to the family say he takes his role as grandfather seriously. For Charles, the question of inheritance was never simply about money or property. It was about ensuring that each member of the family understood their value and knew they were thought of and provided for. The idea that someone would attempt to exclude his grandchildren from his will, particularly without consulting him, reportedly struck at the core of what he believed family relationships should be. The document Charles held in his hands represented more than just a legal change. It symbolized a decision made on his behalf, in his name, but without his involvement. For a man who had waited decades to assume the throne, and who took his responsibilities as both king and family patriarch seriously, this was not merely an administrative oversight. It was seen as a fundamental violation of the trust that should exist between husband and wife, and between the monarch and those closest to him. As the reality of the situation settled over him, Charles reportedly sat in silence, processing what he had discovered. The palace around him continued its daily rhythm, staff members going about their duties unaware of the crisis unfolding in the king's private study. Outside the windows, life in London carried on as normal. But inside those walls, a conflict was beginning that would soon test the stability of the royal household in ways few could have anticipated. The confrontation that followed Charles's discovery was inevitable. According to palace sources, the king made arrangements to meet with Camilla in one of the palace's private sitting rooms. The choice of location was deliberate, a space away from the main corridors where staff members might overhear and where the conversation could remain confidential. The afternoon light filtered through the tall windows as Charles waited, the amended documents still in his possession. When Camilla entered the room, witnesses say she appeared relaxed, seemingly unaware of the storm that was about to break. She greeted Charles warmly, asking if something was wrong. Her tone suggested she expected nothing more than a routine discussion. However, Charles's response immediately changed the atmosphere. His single-word question, delivered in a low and measured tone, carried more weight than any lengthy speech could have. He simply asked her why. The Queen Consort's initial reaction was one of confusion, sources report. She asked for clarification, perhaps hoping the conversation was about something else entirely. But Charles did not leave room for misunderstanding. He held up the folded document and made it clear exactly what he was referring to. He wanted to know why she had taken steps to remove Charlotte and Louis from his will without consulting him or seeking his approval. There was a moment of silence before Camilla responded. According to those briefed on the exchange, she acknowledged her actions but framed them as being in the best interest of the monarchy. She argued that difficult decisions sometimes needed to be made for the sake of the institution's future. Her position was that dispersing royal wealth and resources too broadly could weaken the crown's financial position in generations to come. Charles's response to this justification was swift and pointed. He reportedly challenged the notion that his grandchildren were merely items on a balance sheet to be adjusted for efficiency. He emphasized that these were not abstract figures or theoretical heirs, but real children who were part of his family. The distinction between institutional planning and family loyalty became a central point of disagreement between them. Camilla attempted to explain her reasoning further, suggesting that William's children would be well provided for through their father's inheritance. She pointed out that they already had titles, public roles, and would eventually inherit considerable wealth from William's estate. In her view, this made additional inheritance from Charles less necessary and potentially redundant. She maintained that she had been thinking about the long-term stability of the monarchy and making choices that would strengthen rather than fragment royal resources. However, this argument only seemed to deepen Charles's frustration. Palace insiders say he rejected the premise that providing for all his grandchildren equally would somehow weaken the institution. Instead, he argued that the strength of the monarchy came from the bonds of loyalty and love that held the family together. In his view, cutting away family members for the sake of administrative efficiency missed the entire point of what made the royal family more than just an institution. The conversation grew more heated as both parties defended their positions. Camilla reportedly insisted that sentiment could not be allowed to override practical considerations. She suggested that Charles was allowing his emotions to cloud his judgment about what needed to be done. This characterization of his concern for his grandchildren as mere sentiment particularly angered Charles, sources say. The king's response was forceful. He challenged the idea that caring about his grandchildren's place in the family could be dismissed as sentimentality. He questioned whether Camilla truly understood what it meant to be part of a family that existed in the public eye while still trying to maintain genuine relationships. The role of grandfather, he reportedly insisted, was not something he was willing to compromise on, regardless of institutional considerations. What troubled Charles most, according to those close to him, was not just the action itself, but the manner in which it had been carried out. He repeatedly emphasized that Camilla could have brought her concerns to him directly. She could have presented her arguments and allowed him to make an informed decision. Instead, she had gone behind his back and issued instructions to legal advisors as if she had the authority to make such decisions independently. Camilla's defense was that she believed Charles would not have agreed to the changes if she had asked. She suggested that his attachment to the children prevented him from seeing the situation objectively. This admission that she had acted secretly precisely because she anticipated his disapproval only confirmed Charles's sense of betrayal. In his view, this was not an explanation but rather a confession that she had deliberately circumvented his authority. The exchange continued with both parties becoming increasingly firm in their positions. Camilla argued that the monarchy had always required difficult choices and that personal feelings sometimes needed to be set aside for the greater good. She referenced the long history of royal families making strategic decisions about inheritance and succession, often prioritizing the institution over individual preferences. Charles countered that the future of the monarchy was not separate from the people who comprised it. He insisted that Charlotte and Louis were not peripheral figures but represented the living future of the institution Camilla claimed to be protecting. By attempting to diminish their stake in the family legacy, he argued, she was actually working against the very stability she claimed to champion. The tension in the room reached its peak when Charles brought his hand down forcefully on a nearby table. The sound echoed through the space, and according to witnesses, it marked a turning point in the conversation. His voice, which had been controlled until that moment, rose as he declared that Camilla did not have the right to determine the value or worth of his grandchildren. This was not a negotiation or a debate. It was a statement of absolute position. Staff members who were positioned near the sitting room reported hearing the raised voices, though they could not make out specific words. The intensity of the exchange was apparent even through the thick palace doors. Some servants exchanged worried glances but knew better than to interrupt or inquire about what was happening inside. Camilla, confronted with Charles's anger in its full force, reportedly attempted to soften her approach. She suggested that perhaps she had not handled the situation in the best way and that she should have spoken with him before taking action. However, Charles was not receptive to what he saw as backtracking. He pointed out that the issue was not just about procedure or communication. It was about trust, authority, and the fundamental question of who had the right to make decisions about his estate and his family. The king made it clear that he viewed her actions as an attempt to seize control over matters that were his alone to decide. He characterized it as an overreach that revealed a troubling willingness to act in the shadows rather than in partnership. For Charles, the document he held represented not a well-intentioned mistake, but a calculated move that had been planned and executed without his knowledge. As the confrontation continued, the core disagreement became increasingly clear. Camilla saw herself as making pragmatic decisions for the institution's benefit, even if those decisions were unpopular. Charles saw her actions as a betrayal of trust and an unacceptable interference in family matters. These two perspectives, both sincerely held by their respective advocates, appeared to have no middle ground. The meeting ended without resolution, with Charles making it clear that the proposed changes would not stand and that there would be further consequences for what Camilla had done. The Queen Consort left the sitting room in silence, and those who saw her afterward reported that she appeared shaken by the encounter. The confrontation had laid bare a fundamental rift between them, one that would not be easily repaired. The decision Charles made following the confrontation was one that surprised even those closest to the royal family. According to multiple sources, the king determined that Camilla needed to leave the palace, at least temporarily. This was not a hasty decision made in the heat of anger, but rather a deliberate choice that Charles believed was necessary to protect what he valued most. The instruction was delivered clearly and without ambiguity. Camilla would be required to stay away from the main royal residence. When Charles informed Camilla of this decision, reports suggest she was stunned. The Queen Consort reportedly questioned whether he was serious, unable to believe that their disagreement would result in such a dramatic consequence. However, Charles remained firm. He explained that this was not about punishment, but about boundaries that had been crossed. He needed space to consider the situation, and more importantly, he needed to ensure that his grandchildren's interests were protected from any further interference. The gravity of the moment was not lost on either of them. For Camilla, who had spent decades working to establish her place within the royal family, this represented a potentially devastating setback. She had weathered public criticism, navigated complex family dynamics, and gradually built acceptance among both the royal household and the British public. To be asked to leave, even temporarily, felt like a rejection of all that work and sacrifice. Palace staff were instructed to assist with Camilla's departure, though the arrangements were to be handled with discretion. Those involved in the logistics reported that the atmosphere was tense but professional. Camilla would be staying at a separate royal residence, removed from the day-to-day operations of the main palace. The move was arranged quietly, with minimal staff involvement to reduce the likelihood of leaks to the press. Senior aides coordinated the transfer of necessary personal items and ensured that Camilla would have appropriate security and support at her temporary location. Following Camilla's departure, Charles spent considerable time alone in the palace gardens. Multiple observers noted that he appeared to seek solace in the outdoor spaces, walking the gravel paths with his hands clasped behind his back. The gardens had always been a place of contemplation for him, somewhere he could think without the weight of his official duties pressing down on him. In the days after the confrontation, he was seen there frequently, often standing by the fountain or sitting on one of the stone benches, sometimes for an hour or more at a time. During these solitary moments, those who knew him well believed he was reflecting on what the situation meant for his family. Charlotte and Louis remained at the center of his thoughts. He reportedly recalled specific memories of time spent with them, moments that highlighted why their place in the family was so important to him. These were not grand state occasions, but simple interactions that revealed the genuine bonds between grandfather and grandchildren. He remembered Charlotte's thoughtful questions about family history, her interest in understanding the traditions and responsibilities that came with being part of the royal family. He thought of Louis's spontaneous hugs and his infectious enthusiasm for life. Charles understood that his decision would have consequences beyond the immediate family crisis. The monarchy operated under constant scrutiny, and any hint of discord within the royal household would inevitably attract attention. However, he also recognized that some principles were worth defending regardless of the public relations complications they might create. His grandchildren's security and their rightful place in the family legacy fell into that category. He had waited his entire life to become king, and now that he held the position, he was determined to use his authority to protect what mattered most. It was during this period that Charles decided to write to his son William. Rather than rely on staff intermediaries or formal communications, he chose to explain the situation personally through a letter. According to those familiar with the correspondence, Charles felt it was important that William heard the full story directly from him, before rumors or incomplete information reached him through other channels. The letter writing took place late one evening in Charles's private study, where he carefully crafted his words to convey both the facts of the situation and his emotional reasoning. The letter reportedly laid out the facts of what had occurred, including the discovery of the amended will, the confrontation with Camilla, and the decision to ask her to leave the palace temporarily. Charles wanted William to understand not just what had happened, but why he had responded as he did. The tone of the letter was said to be measured but firm, conveying both the seriousness of the situation and Charles's resolve to protect his grandchildren's interests. He also expressed his hope that William would understand and support the difficult position he had been forced to take. When the letter arrived at William and Catherine's residence, it came as a significant shock. Catherine was the first to open it, breaking the royal seal and beginning to read. Her reaction was immediate and visceral. According to sources close to the couple, her face paled as she absorbed the contents. The words on the page painted a picture of family conflict that neither William nor Catherine had anticipated. When William asked what was wrong, her response was direct and startling. She told him that his father had sent Camilla away from the palace. The couple sat together to process this information. William took the letter from Catherine and read it himself, his expression growing increasingly serious with each paragraph. When he finished, he folded the paper carefully and set it down. His first response, according to those who were later briefed on the conversation, was to express support for his father's decision. William reportedly stated clearly that Charles had been right to take the action he did. He understood the seriousness of attempting to alter the king's will without permission, and he appreciated that his father was standing up for Charlotte and Louis. Catherine found herself thinking back to interactions she had observed over the years between Camilla and the children. These were not dramatic incidents, but rather small moments that had registered at the time as slightly off, but which she had not dwelled on significantly. Now, in light of recent events, these memories took on new meaning and seemed to form a pattern she had not fully recognized before. As she and William talked, she began sharing these recollections, and William acknowledged that he too had noticed certain things that now seemed more significant. She recalled a garden party where Charlotte had approached Camilla with flowers she had picked. The child's gesture had been sweet and spontaneous, the kind of thing that typically melted adult hearts. However, Camilla's response had been polite but distant. She had accepted the flowers with a brief smile before quickly turning her attention elsewhere. Catherine remembered noticing Charlotte's disappointment, but had chalked it up to Camilla being busy with other guests. Now she wondered if it reflected something deeper, a fundamental lack of connection between Camilla and the children. Another memory involved a Christmas gathering where Louis had been animatedly telling a story at the lunch table. Children's stories at that age tend to be rambling and full of enthusiasm, and family members usually indulge them with smiles and encouragement. However, Catherine recalled that Camilla had turned away during Louis's tale to engage in conversation with another adult, essentially turning the child out. William had frowned slightly at the time, but neither of them had addressed it. Looking back, it seemed less like a momentary distraction and more like a consistent pattern of disinterest. These recollections, along with others Catherine now revisited, suggested a consistent lack of warmth toward William and Catherine's children. It was not overt hostility or cruelty, but rather a coolness, a sense that the children were not particularly important to Camilla, except in their official capacity as future members of the royal hierarchy. The discovery of her attempt to remove them from Charles's will now seemed like an extension of this underlying attitude, a confirmation that she viewed them as expendable elements in her vision of the monarchy's future. William and Catherine discussed what the situation might mean for the family going forward. They recognized that the press would eventually learn something was amiss, and speculation would run rampant. However, William was adamant that his primary loyalty was to his father and to his children. He told Catherine that he would not question Charles's judgment on this matter, and that he would stand behind whatever decisions his father made. Catherine agreed completely, and they began discussing how they might need to protect their children from public attention if the story broke. Meanwhile, in her temporary residence away from the main palace, Camilla was reportedly experiencing a range of emotions. Sources close to her suggested she felt betrayed by Charles's response to what she still viewed as actions taken in good faith. She had spent years building her position within the royal family, enduring public criticism and working to win acceptance. The fact that she was now being removed from the center of royal life felt to her like an unjust punishment. She reportedly spent long hours reflecting on the situation, trying to understand how things had deteriorated so quickly. Those who spoke with Camilla during this period described her as determined not to be cast as the villain in the narrative that would inevitably emerge. She believed her intentions had been misunderstood and that history would eventually vindicate her concerns about the monarchy's financial structure. If the situation became public, she was reportedly prepared to defend herself and her actions vigorously. She began considering what she might say if called upon to explain her perspective, crafting in her mind a defense that emphasized duty and pragmatism over personal animosity. Back at the palace, staff members were acutely aware that something significant had occurred. While no official announcement had been made internally, Camilla's absence was noted by everyone who worked in the royal household. Servants moved through their duties with extra caution, speaking in hushed tones and avoiding speculation, at least openly. However, the tension was palpable in the corridors and common areas where staff gathered. Some of the longer-serving employees had witnessed family tensions before, but this felt different, more serious, and more consequential. The watchful silence that descended over the palace was different from its usual dignified quiet. This was the silence of people waiting for something else to happen, for the other shoe to drop. Everyone understood that the current situation was temporary, that some resolution or public acknowledgement would eventually be necessary. Until then, discretion was paramount, and those who served the royal family kept their observations to themselves, understanding that loose talk could have serious repercussions. In the gardens, where Charlotte and Louis continued to play during family visits, the children remained blissfully unaware of the adult drama unfolding around them. They ran through the faux pathways, their laughter echoing off the old stone walls, providing a stark contrast to the heavy atmosphere inside the palace itself. When Charles watched them during these moments, observers noted a mixture of affection and protectiveness in his expression. A grandfather determined to shield them from complications they were too young to understand. These moments reinforced his conviction that he had made the right decision, regardless of how difficult it had been. Despite the careful efforts to maintain discretion within the palace walls, it was perhaps inevitable that news of the royal rift would eventually reach the outside world. The first hint that something was amiss came through whispers in circles that moved adjacent to the royal household. Someone, whether deliberately or inadvertently, had shared information about the disagreement between Charles and Camilla. What started as a quiet rumor began to gain momentum as it passed from one person to another. The initial leak was subtle, reportedly consisting of vague references to a dispute within the royal family regarding financial matters. However, in the world of royal reporting, even the smallest hint of controversy can spark intense interest. Journalists who specialized in covering the monarchy began making inquiries, reaching out to their contacts and sources to verify what they were hearing. Within days, the whispers had transformed into something more concrete and more dangerous to the palace's attempts at privacy. By the time the story reached major news outlets, it had evolved from vague references to specific claims. Headlines began appearing that spoke directly about disagreements over the king's will and inheritance arrangements. Some reports mentioned tensions between Charles and Camilla specifically, while others focused on questions about which family members would benefit from royal estates. The language used in these early reports was often speculative, filled with phrases like allegedly and according to sources, but the core facts were remarkably accurate. The public reaction to these revelations was swift and divided. On social media platforms and in traditional news comment sections, people expressed strong opinions about the situation. Some voiced sympathy for Camilla, arguing that she had always faced unfair criticism, and that this was likely another example of the press targeting her unfairly. They questioned whether the reports were even accurate or if they represented yet another attempt to undermine the Queen Consort's position. However, a significant portion of the public took a different view. Many people expressed support for King Charles, particularly when reports clarified that the dispute involved his grandchildren. The idea that anyone would attempt to exclude Charlotte and Louis from their grandfather's will struck many as particularly troubling. Comments online and conversations in public spaces often reflected the sentiment that Charles was right to defend his grandchildren's interests, regardless of the institutional considerations that might have motivated Camilla's actions. The press coverage intensified as more details emerged. Newspapers ran extensive analyses of royal inheritance practices, examining historical precedents and discussing the potential implications of the current situation. Television news programs devoted segments to the story, bringing in royal commentators and legal experts to discuss what it all meant. The story had all the elements that made for compelling coverage: family drama, significant amounts of money, and the always fascinating dynamics of the British royal family. Inside the palace, the public exposure of the private conflict created additional pressure on an already tense situation. Staff members who had been carefully maintaining discretion now found themselves fielding inquiries from outside contacts and dealing with heightened security measures designed to prevent further leaks. The atmosphere became even more strained as everyone understood that the world was now watching and judging every move the royal family made. For Charles, the media attention was deeply unwelcome but not entirely unexpected. He had lived his entire life in the public eye and understood that private matters could quickly become public spectacles. However, that understanding did not make the situation any easier to bear. According to those close to him, Charles was particularly concerned about how the coverage might affect Charlotte and Louis. While the children were still young enough that they might not fully grasp what was being reported, he worried about the long-term impact of having their names associated with such a public family conflict. The king's response to the media frenzy was characteristically measured. Rather than issuing detailed statements or attempting to explain the nuances of the situation to the press, he chose to remain largely silent on the matter. Palace officials released only the briefest of comments describing the situation as a private family matter and declining to provide specifics. This restraint was deliberate, reflecting Charles's belief that engaging too deeply with the press coverage would only fuel further speculation and prolong the story. It was during this period of intense public scrutiny that Charles made the decision to have one final, formal meeting with Camilla. According to palace sources, he believed that a clear conclusion to their conflict was necessary, both for their own clarity and for the institution of the monarchy. The meeting was scheduled to take place in a private room at the palace, away from the areas where staff members regularly worked. Both parties understood that this conversation would likely determine the nature of their relationship going forward. When Camilla arrived for the meeting, those who saw her reported that she appeared composed but visibly strained. The weeks since her departure from the palace had clearly taken a toll. She entered the room where Charles waited, and the two greeted each other with formal courtesy that contrasted sharply with the warmth that had once characterized their interactions. The distance between them, both physical and emotional, was immediately apparent. Camilla spoke first, according to accounts of the meeting. She told Charles that she had come not to argue her case further, but to ensure he understood her motivations. She reiterated that her actions had never been driven by malice or personal animosity towards Charlotte and Louis. Instead, she maintained that she had been trying to fulfill what she saw as her duty to think strategically about the monarchy's future. She spoke about the sacrifices she had made over the years to support Charles and the institution, enduring criticism and public skepticism while trying to prove her commitment to the role she had assumed. Charles listened without interrupting, his expression giving little away. When Camilla finished speaking, he took a moment before responding. His reply, according to those briefed on the conversation, was not angry or accusatory. Instead, it was calm and final. He acknowledged that Camilla believed she had been acting in good faith, but he made it clear that belief alone did not excuse the breach of trust that had occurred. He emphasized once again that the decision about his will and his grandchildren's place in it was his alone to make. The king went on to explain that trust, once broken, was difficult to rebuild. The fact that Camilla had acted in secrecy, knowing he would disapprove, demonstrated a willingness to prioritize her judgment over his authority. For Charles, this was not a matter that could be resolved with apologies or explanations. It represented a fundamental problem in their relationship that had implications beyond their personal feelings for each other. Charles then outlined what would happen going forward. Camilla would not be returning to her previous position within the palace's day-to-day operations. She would maintain her title and public role as Queen Consort, as removing that would create constitutional complications and fuel even more damaging speculation. However, her involvement in matters related to royal finances, estate planning, and inheritance would be eliminated entirely. These decisions would be made by Charles in consultation with his legal advisors and family members, but Camilla would have no input. The finality of these terms was emphasized by Charles's tone and demeanor. This was not a negotiation or a starting point for discussion. It was a decision that had been made after careful consideration, and it would not be revisited. Camilla, according to sources, accepted these terms without further argument. Perhaps she recognized that no amount of discussion would change Charles's mind, or perhaps she simply lacked the energy to continue fighting a battle she seemed unlikely to win. As the meeting drew to a close, Camilla stood to leave. She moved toward the door slowly, and for a brief moment at the threshold, she paused. Some witnesses wondered if she might turn back to say something more, to make one final attempt to bridge the gap that had opened between them. However, after a few seconds of hesitation, she continued forward, leaving the room and walking down the corridor with measured steps. Charles remained in the room after she left, standing by the window and looking out over the palace grounds. Staff members who saw him in the hours following the meeting described him as appearing both relieved and troubled. The immediate crisis had been addressed, and boundaries had been established that would prevent similar situations from arising in the future. However, the personal cost of the conflict was evident in his expression and demeanor. In the days that followed the meeting, life at the palace gradually began to return to a semblance of normalcy. Routines were re-established, and the intense, focus on the internal conflict began to ease slightly. However, those close to the royal family understood that the situation had fundamentally altered relationships and power dynamics within the household. The trust between Charles and Camilla, once a cornerstone of their partnership, had been severely damaged, if not completely destroyed. The public continued to follow the story with interest, though as weeks passed without new dramatic developments, media attention began to shift to other topics. However, royal observers noted that the conflict had raised important questions about the future of the monarchy and about how family relationships intersected with institutional responsibilities. The idea that personal disputes could erupt so dramatically within the royal household reminded everyone that despite the titles and the traditions, the royal family faced many of the same challenges as any other family. Yet even as the immediate crisis appeared to resolve, there remained an underlying sense of uncertainty. The royal family had weathered this storm, but the damage it caused would take time to fully assess. Charles had made his position clear and had taken steps to protect his grandchildren's interests, but the relationship with his wife had been irreparably altered. As the palace looked toward the future, there was an awareness that other challenges might emerge and that the stability of the institution could never be taken for granted. The question that lingered in many minds was whether this conflict represented an isolated incident or the beginning of deeper troubles that had yet to fully surface.